So welcome to this dialogue with the author. We're very excited to be here today. And I do just want to say a few words about the Taos Institute. So I'm Alex Arnold, I'm the executive consultant. And the Taos Institute is a virtual educational organization. We promote social constructionist, relational, appreciative ideas and practices, and we do so in many, many different ways. We have an online community, the Taos Institute Commons, that is free to join, and hopefully you've already visited since you're here, but we encourage you to continue exploring the many resources that are available there. We post all of our announcements. We have a collection of 90 books, over 90 books in our World Share book series that are free for downloading. And we also do workshops. There's a self-paced course available at the moment to introduce social construction. So lots of activities going on at the Taos Institute, and we're very glad that you're here to participate and hope that you will continue to engage with us. So I don't want to take too much time, so we'll pass it on to Sheila McNamee, Vice President of the Taos Institute, and she will introduce our author today.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I want to also, besides introducing Susie, I want to introduce Robin Cooper, who is here also to co-facilitate this, although unfortunately Robin has double booked, and so we'll only be here for a little while. But yeah, we're eager to get into this conversation. Susie Riva is the author with whom we're speaking today. And I had the good fortune of knowing Susie for, I don't know how many years, Susie, it's been a long time. And writing the preface to this book, and Robin wrote the afterword to the book. And so we both are quite familiar with this really fascinating work that Susie's going to share with us today. So why don't I just turn it right over to you, Susie?
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you so much, because the Taos Institute has been so important to me. In the beginning of my doctoral studies, I called Sheila and she gave me the support I needed. And through this virtual learning organization, I was able to connect from Switzerland and to finish my PhD with the Taos Institute. And so I am forever grateful. And I thank Sheila and Robin for collaborating with me and supporting this book. Thanks. So we're going to have Alex, who is going to put up the different slides that I've prepared as a support for my presentation.
Could I just also say to everyone, please feel free to put comments or questions in the chat. I will do my best to monitor as Susie is talking. It's not one of my fortes, I have to say, but I'm going to try really hard. And I may interrupt Susie if there's an interesting comment or question that someone poses. So please feel free to do that.
So this first image is a metaphor. Let us beat our swords into plowshares is a Bible verse, but it's also a statue that was given to the United States in New York by the Russians in the 1950s. And it seemed to me to speak of this shape-shifting and crafting process that I'm going to present. I work at Creighton University and I teach online courses in the Department of Cultural and Social Studies, specifically within the medical anthropology program. Thank you, Alex, for moving forward. This transformational learning stemmed from my book, Homing In. It incorporated my story of connecting, reunion, and belonging. So I was adopted and found my birth parents, and this was my first autoethnographic work. I have combined in this book, Crafting Peace, autoethnography, duoethnography, and I consider these transformational pedagogies that have emerged from the autoethnographic process. And this has become for me a teaching story. You can see that I have a website, and I invite you to go to the website and see the different blogs that I have done to support Homing In, and then to offer concepts that I've developed along the way that gave rise to Crafting Peace. Thank you, Alex. So here is the cover, Crafting Peace Through Autoethnography, Reflexive Pedagogies for Navigating Difficult Times. And I have used the Transformagram Learning Model as a way to describe the pedagogies that I've integrated into my online courses. I teach conflict resolution with an approach to narrative conflict resolution. It's based on transformational learning, and I use story mandalas for connecting theoretical frameworks with experiential learning. It's very important that students can have respect for their own lived experience and can then enter into the dual ethnographic process and receive peer support. This process fosters narrative coherency that Dan Siegel speaks of. And it is also important for me to explain this homing in mechanism that adopted children who find their birth parents have. And it's a form of inner compass. And once I experienced this, I thought, well, this is something that everyone has. So how can we activate our inner compasses and find our way into the future? Thank you, Alex. This is the idea and concept that came from psychiatry. So as I was writing, liphogram came to me in my autoethnographic work and homing in. And then I found that Hinton and Kiermaier had developed the concept of transformagrams. And so that allowed me to move lipograms into this idea of transformative processes that become transformagrams and that allow for the shift. So I'm applying a concept from psychiatry for transformational learning in higher education. Thank you, Alex. One of the important foundations for my work and a great inspiration has been Jung's Red Book. And I recently went to the Jungian Museum in Zurich, where Jung lived, raised his children, wrote his books, and also received his patients. This is a beautiful picture of one of Jung's illustrations. And during the visit to Jung, I went to this wonderful exhibit, and I understood the importance of Jung's self-experimentation that was the genesis of his theoretical framework. So the story mandalas incorporate this aesthetic approach, and the ethnographic method provides a methodology to generate the shift in a process where our conflict narratives are transformed and new pathways are opened, as Sarah Cobb refers to flyways or lines of flight. Thank you, Alex. One of the concepts that arose from my autoethnographic work was homing into Earthship. As I was talking about kinship and finding my birth family, it moved towards, in the writing process, living in and on Earthship. So kinning, which is a word used in Norway by a researcher who studies adoption, became an important term for me, how we make family, but also attachment. How do we become linked to the relationships in the more than human world? And so this storytelling moved into teaching with a format that allowed me to develop concepts that I have been able to incorporate into my own teaching. So activating this inner compass also became a form of quest orientation. As we search and ask questions, we are taken to the answers. And this important pedagogy, or an important aspect of this pedagogy, is really connecting the lived experience with the theoretical frameworks, the books that are used, and the articles in the films are embodied through the autoethnographic practice. And this development of the transformational pedagogies is something that I like to refer to as beautifying your story mandala. Thank you, Alex. This Jungian transcendent function is an essential part of the work because students have to represent artistically their conflict and illness narratives. In my homing in work, I found the golden pocket watch as to be an important transitional object. I speak of divine timing and synchronicity, how I found my birth family, and at the same time, my sister, who had also been adopted, found our birth family, as our grandmother was aware that she was dying of cancer, wanted to meet us before she passed away. Somehow our heartstrings were pulled, and there was a communication that took place, and we both homed in at the same time and were reunited. That experience was a form of radical amazement that gave an important aspect to the story of, and my life, understanding of divine timing. And I like to use these different symbols and stories in the transmission of for higher education, that we can use these different metaphorical and symbolic processes to aid students to transcend conflict and illness, and also to reset the timepiece. Thank you, Alex. So this gives you a look at these transformational pedagogies while we're navigating difficult times. So we're all aware of the mental health crisis that young people are facing. And so we must respond to this by developing new pedagogies to accompany students. Accompaniment is an essential part of this process. We know that the influence of smartphones has affected students' abilities to concentrate and their attention spans. We know that students are anxious about the Anthropocene and the sixth phase of extinction. Students are facing political polarization with wars. And all of these anxieties are contributing to their decreasing mental health. Thank you, Alex. So from lithograms to transformagrams, we're using these transformational pedagogies to generate processes that move from the individual to the collective, and designing spaces where we can use change processes that arise through autoethnography and duoethnography, which are methods, social science methods. In my courses, they're recognized as doing social science. So the students learn about social science by applying the method. And this is also important for integral human development and wayfinding. Thank you, Alex. This is a picture of the transformagram. Alex, maybe you can just tap and it will start to move. There. So this image usually moves, and it shows the transformagram, how we're shifting and transforming through relationships and dialogue. And our dialogue, not just with the duo-ethnographic partners, but also with the authors that we're reading. And we're entering into this deep dialogue so that we can move and shift. And so these forms of these methods and these forms of research are future forming. Thank you, Alex.
Oh, sorry, it's not moving now.
That's okay. I can move forward.
There we go.
So this shows the different stages. So the Transformagram Portfolio is the stepwise process. First, I have students, because we're working online, so they make a video of their conflict or illness narrative. And then they go through the process of writing about it with Kleinman's 8 questions that were the illness narratives transformed into conflict narratives, the basis of my PhD work. And as these students work through these different phases, they make a cartography also of the of the resources and relationships that they discover and that they map. This narrative mapping opens up to creative space, but also to dual ethnographic exchanges that give them feedback about their work. This is really important for reinforcing mental health because it's been shown that strong peer relationships improve mental health for students. So this is very important in the idea of the conflict narratives, working to find resources for conflict that are appropriate. Students will choose a conflict and then they must find resources that correspond, just as they can also, when they're working on their illness narratives, use care baskets and fill care baskets with the resources that they have identified. Witnessing is one of the most important parts of this. Witnessing the process as a teacher, writing weekly comments as they engage with their Transformagram portfolio, supports them and accompanies them. And beautifying the story mandala reinforces the creative learning process, this idea of adding in golden threads of wisdom. Thank you, Alex. One of the terms that arose from my writing is mediatorship. So yes, I've been working in mediation as a mediator, as a researcher, and now teaching conflict resolution. But I've found during the autoethnographic process that mediatorship was also this ability to connect to living wisdom. And we need new pedagogies to mediate our relationships and, for instance, our approach to integrative medicine. Instead of having conflict with biomedical approaches and CAM, complementary and alternative medicine, how can we move through the lived experience of mapping the resources through our illness narratives and see how we can come to integrative medicine, for instance. So we're engendering conflict wisdom through this process and beholding interconnectedness and understanding in this way how conflict and illness are interrelated and how conflict as illness is an interconnected approach and perspective. Thank you. I like to talk about a continuum of narrative practices in relationship to letter arc also. And these narrative practices are threaded into a methodological mandala: autoethnography, narrative therapy, narrative mediation, narrative conflict resolution, all come together in this interconnected process, which I like to see in this presentation of a mandala. It's a way for me to see and to understand how we thread stories. Thank you. We need a new story, new flyways for future forming. This also comes from Thomas Berry's work and the dream of the earth. And so in a space of creative flexibility, we co-design transformagrams. It's very important today to understand the ecological situation we're in and to address it in our teaching. Even if we don't have the answers, this generative process allows students to imagine a hopeful future. Sarah Kopp's work with narrative conflict resolution, Winslade and Monk's work with narrative mediation, Kenneth Gergen's relational being, as I presented Kiermaier and Hinton's work with the flexibility hypothesis, the importance of increasing adaptability today, Dan Siegel and narrative coherency, how autoethnography actually integrates the brain and it improves our resiliency and is a protection against mental health disorders. Lisa Miller and quest orientation, and Mary Watkins and her ideas and concepts of mutual accompaniment. Thank you, Alex. So this beautiful egg represents how we co-write narratives of belonging in and on Earthship. It's a transformational, spiritual, and ecological approach to autoethnography. And I'm moving towards also an application for integral human development and wayfinding. I think that this egg shows this integral approach, this holistic existence, and how stories come together. Thank you. So here's the book, again with the picture of the peace sign and crafting peace with a form of a patchwork where we are crafting, and how important it is to pass on skills and methods to young students today so that they can develop conflict wisdom as they face the challenges of our times. And hopefully this approach can inspire other teachers in higher education to think of their pedagogies and how they can accompany students and integrate autoethnography and duoethnography, knowing that by doing this, they're also increasing students' resiliency as they face the challenges of today's world. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I have just a couple of things. I was wondering if you could articulate what a duoethnography is, just for people who may not be familiar with that term.
So at a conference, I met Dr. Sawyer, who is, I think, in Portland still today, and he was working in education and explained to me about his pedagogy of working with a partner to write autoethnographic accounts, and especially applying this in the educational sciences. And so I used his model of duoethnography to increase the relational approach to learning within my courses.
So, I mean, what I take away as one of the key factors of what you're doing in this book and with your work is really creating an academic context where students really learn theory, method by connecting to their personal lives, which is often not the case in the academic world. And so also by having students work together and join into each other's stories, the stories, of course, as you say, shift and shape shifting continually. So one other thing that I think is unique to your work, and I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more. You already have spoken to it, but this merging of illness narratives and conflict narratives, because that's not a place that people immediately go to, I don't think, to see those in the same frame.
Yes, well, I wanted to also add, before responding, to the importance of your work on relational responsibility. And that is an important aspect in the courses when you're working with duoethnography, because you have to have this responsibility toward your partner. They're given a partner in the very beginning. And I'm amazed at how well the students handle that. And yes, throughout the course, it's a holistic approach and an integral approach that develops a perception, a way of beholding conflict as illness and seeing the interconnectedness of this. And I think when we're teaching now in medical anthropology, we see how health is so impacted by environmental aspects and conditions. So when we're looking at climate change, for instance, we know that this is affecting us. So this interconnected approach, I think, is essential for finding solutions, the future forming methods that allow students to ask questions. And it's this form of searching within academia, this quest for knowledge, but the holistic approach and a holistic lens. When we behold, we transform.
Thanks. One other thing, and I would love to invite everyone to, raise your hand if you have a question, put it in the chat or what have you. But so Susie, there are a lot of there's a lot of unusual vocabulary embedded in this work. And so what I'm curious about is how you bring students into that. I mean, do they begin this process with like, she's crazy, what's she talking about? Or how do you bring them into this new language and this new way of being?
Well, I share strong academic books with them as course books. And I think that's really helpful. So I have Sarah Cobb's book on the introduction to conflict resolution and the 3 epochs that are presented with a narrative approach. And so that they have some very strong academic foundations in the course. And then they have my articles that are integrated into the course so that they can become familiar with the language. My language came from this process, like we see with Jung in his Red Book. A lot of his concepts arose from the Red Book, but the family didn't show that book until 2009 because they were worried about his reputation. And so I used that self-experimentation reference to see how we can, or to show how when we start writing and connect to living wisdom and establish a connection that I refer to as mediatorship, we find inspiration. And as we future form, we need new words because the words that we're using today aren't necessarily sufficient to describe what we're connecting to as a moral imagination, as Lederach would say. So even Dan Siegel creates new words like the we, me and we, seeing how interrelated things are today. And so I've allowed myself to create new words so that I can move forward into this future forming space and find flyways and then invite students to also be creative in that way and to engage with creative aspects through their creative representations, but also their autoethnographic writing.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that the language has been co-opted and has a common meaning. So creating new, new ways of talking about these relational processes is useful with new language. At the same time, sometimes I think co-opting the word, like reclaiming certain language in a relational mode is also useful. So another question I had is, could you, what kind of environment, you must need to create a very safe environment for students to start with their conflict narrative, start with their illness narrative. How do you do that? I mean, you can't just jump into something like this in an academic setting.
So I found Watkins' work, which he talks about home places, how we can create safe spaces for students to be very inspiring. And so I use the term glovercal homescapes. So the global and the local link through the virtual. And I coined that word in an anthropology conference in Switzerland. And so I'm trying to create a glovercal home space or homescape, like we have a landscape where people feel safe. Now, I apply this to my students in the Jesuit Worldwide Learning Program. I have students that come into my course and are with American, more traditional students. And this is because I'm working at a Jesuit institute, so a Jesuit higher learning institute, Creighton University in Omaha, and they partner with the Jesuit Worldwide Learning Program that is based in Geneva. And so it's very intercultural in my conflict courses. Narrative conflict resolution is done with a very intercultural group. Mm-hmm. And it is really important to be in a safe place. I've even had Afghan students in my courses, and some have then become refugees with the different political events. And last year, I even had an Afghan woman who was not able to leave Afghanistan finish her bachelor's degree with me. And so that's, creating a safe space is extremely important. And it's a challenge to do that in online learning. But online learning is also this incredible opportunity for us to reach these students in the margins and to bring them in and to allow American students to interact with them and see how they see the world. So they have a lot of respect for each other. And I guess we have to model that. And maybe it's the way we write our modules, how we speak in our videos, um, the importance we give to relationships, these relational approaches, which are so central at the Taos Institute. And possibly they pick up the importance of this relational responsibility, and then they are also modeling that in the way they work together.
Yeah, it's. I think that raises an important point about all the work that we do, which is it's less about telling and more about doing, showing and being relationally oriented, rather than having, a theory or a concept that you need to memorize. Sally,
Well,
go
I'd
ahead.
just like to say, well, I quote you with radical presence. So I learned from you the importance of radical presence, and then I've tried to implement and embody that in this pedagogy.
Thank you. Sally, you had a question or a comment in the chat. Do you want to voice it yourself?
Sure. We were both wondering actually about how your students have responded to these ideas. Because whenever we try new things or innovative things, it sometimes goes smoothly and sometimes there's pushback. So we were just wondering.
Seems
Yes,
like
well, thank you. Thank you for asking that, because in the book I have examples of the students' work, and it's just amazing the work they've done. So I call their work a Transformagram Portfolio. And so they have the different phases, the stepwise phases that all fit together in their transformagram. So it begins with their video, and then it goes through the different phases that I share. I share each phase, everything that I put in my course, I've put in the book so that you could transpose it into one of your courses. But their work is amazing, and their conflict narratives actually reflect conflicts that I think we're all very much aware of and experiencing. So, for instance, one student wrote about reproduction rights. The Afghan students have written about the difficulties with the war and the cultural differences, using song as a metaphor for these conflicts. I've had students write about their illness narrative and make the most beautiful artistic representations of, a broken bone or eczema. And so this transcendent union function is something that they grasp. Um, they're also able then to have more structured representations, for instance, conflicts in organizations. And so the student work, I think, shows that they're able to embrace this maybe innovative way of teaching, but they really engage with it. And one student, for instance, this summer is a refugee who's now in the United States, but she was in Jordan and she's African, and she was experiencing lots of racism as a refugee in Jordan, and she made the most beautiful painting. And so their Transformagram portfolios are a form of artifact that I hope that they will keep and cherish, because it represents this whole transformational process where their lifogram became a transformagram.
it seems like a lot of the learnings are cognitive, intellectual, but some of these instances you're describing seems like they could be very emotional, that this could really charge up lots of feelings, mixed feelings, anger, frustration, depression. So does this kind of cognitive exercise lead to emotional expression and needing to deal with that?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So I had one student who was from an African country where there was great war, he had the experience of war and the trauma of war. And then he went to Canada. But while he was in the course, he actually got hit by a bus. And so he was hurt and he was in the hospital. And when it came to representing his conflict, it was very traumatic for him, not just because of the trauma of the war, but then also all of the hope that he had to go to Canada and then having this accident. And so it was important to accompany him and not to push him to try to go too deeply, but to respect that it was too much for him to do more than what he was able to. So I didn't, it's also feeling the balance and adapting the pedagogy for the students, because when I'm working with refugee students, their English isn't perfect, but I don't believe that is something that should stop me from teaching. And the evaluation, like I've learned with Sheila, evaluation, what do we value? I see the transformative process is what I'm looking at. And so when they engage with the transformative process and they show that they're working through the stepwise phases, then that's also a form of success within the course. It's what I'm looking at. And so, yes, I have had that one example, but not many examples actually where students couldn't address their conflict or their illness narrative.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Joost, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you, Susan, for this work. I've been teaching personal coaching to students, undergraduate students, for 10 years, and which I recently stopped, unfortunately, as I heard your story, it reminds me of the greatness of this work. By the way, I totally agree with the importance of creating a safe space for students, either online or offline, as a prerequisite to engage in these conversations. So thank you for that. I was not familiar with the term storying Mandela, so I Googled it quickly during your presentation, and I found some definition. And it also is reflected on sharing personal stories, becoming collective. And this triggered me in asking you if you could maybe explain a bit more about how you apply it. You referenced, you mentioned some steps a couple of times. So I was just wondering about the technique or the steps that students take when working on their transformagrams, which is a great term as well. So I was wondering if you'd say a bit more about that.
So when I was looking for a title for my my adoption and reunion story, I had to think, well, what do I really want to say? And so the homing in mechanism was something I thought, well, this is what's essential. This is what I want to share with the world, that we all have this innate ability to home in. So how do we activate it? And then as I was writing, I felt, okay, this is holistic. It's like a hologram. It's a story mandala, because I'm referring to Saint Hildegard von Bingen and I'm referring to Carl Jung and this whole process for becoming whole. And so it seemed to represent my process of becoming whole, moving through the different phases of my identity as I found my birth parents and had to move from being adopted, reunited, and then also being Swiss and American, two different languages, living in Switzerland, all of these things. So it became to me a complex representation of a generative process. And so when I was trying to imagine this pedagogy, I refer to it as a story mandala, because within that idea, I'm integrating the references of Saint Hildegard von Bingen in Europe, but also Carl Jung in Switzerland, and their understanding that was artistic, just as I showed the book, the Red Book, but also a vision. It was a vision of finding processes, the individuation process and other processes to become whole. And I believe from my own practice that autoethnography is a tool for integral human development. It has allowed me to become more whole, and I wanted to share that with the students.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Suzanne, can I invite you to voice your question?
Yes, it was to see if you could say a little bit more about the Hildegard of Bingen material. Do you have some quotes that you use? And also, I really like, that you're using her work to bring in wholeness. And you're also making me think of the wholeness principle in appreciative inquiry. Did you make any links there too? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Her work is very inspiring on many different levels. She's the first woman that was able to write in Europe. The Pope allowed her to write, and so we have her writings in ancient texts that are preserved, and that is a great inspiration. But also her artwork, her music, and then her approaches to healing. So because she was in a convent, she was aware of and learned about the healing properties of plants, and she used the terms virtues. So the plants had virtues, different animal, like the animals like the marmot and the marmot oil, the virtues of the plants were being shared with people. And then you understand that we too have virtues, and how do we share them? How can we give away our virtues and share them in the world, just as she refers to that in her vision. So the mandalas that she used also show that she was thinking in a holistic manner, and she was connecting her knowledge of the plants to how to prepare them and how to heal. And causes and cures is so close to medical anthropology because she was already defining the causes of illness and then looking at the cures. And so the course actually looks at these basic ideas. What are the causes? Because we're using autoethnography to be reflective, to looking at the root causes. And the textbook shows the root causes through the different epochs, and so allow students to do that. But then to take that same view, that same perception, and apply it to their own inner process that then meets with the outer process. So I think St. Hildegard von Bingen's work connects the earth with the sky. So I use the reference of a book, Rooted in the Earth, Rooted in the Sky, and to see how we are standing in between, and in this liminal space, we can transform. Have I answered your question? Is there something else?
Very much on Hildegard, thank you. But I was also interested in any overlap with the wholeness principle in appreciative inquiry. And did anything resonate there?
With appreciative inquiry?
Appreciative inquiry has one of its principles is called wholeness. And so you made me think of that principle. And did you make any connection yourself there?
Yes, well, I grew from the Taos Institute PhD. And so, of course, this whole approach of appreciative inquiry is central. And it's the way the questions, I might say that if you look at in the book, the pedagogy and the different stepwise phases, they mirror these core principles of appreciative inquiry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Susie, I'm thinking about this concept of being holistic and wholeness, and juxtaposing it against kind of the current moment that we live in, and the image that we have of our identities as kind of fragmented. And so I feel this tension between embracing the fragmentation rather than moving toward making everything a nice, neat, whole package. Just like playing devil's advocate here, like, how do you, is thinking of ourselves as wholes, as coherent wholes, important? Is it necessary? Is it the more positive way forward?
Thank you for asking that. I think I ask that every day, how can I walk through? So that's my conflict or illness narrative. And that's a concept that I didn't show on the slides, but that it's a core concept that came from homing in, the Holy Grail way, the railway, walking through our conflict and illnesses. And so there's something extremely important about going to the core. So like we say, go to the bone, we go to the bone. And in the bone is this ability to heal. The idea that when we go deeply inside, we touch on a part of ourselves that then is able to mend and repair. So it's a form of narrative repair when we start writing. And I've found in some nature-based writing references to plants' innate way of beautifying themselves through time, through evolution. And I feel that we share that. And when I say the beautifying, I don't mean it in a superficial way, but when we start writing, when we're engaged in the autoethnographic process, we might talk with an author, or we might see a beautiful picture. We might have a conversation. And all of those dialogical processes work to beautify our own story mandala. And the living wisdom seems to increase the golden threads of wisdom that are then woven into our stories because we engage in the meaning-making process. Like Frankl says in logotherapy, when we engage deeply with the meaning-making process, we are able to survive. We are able to meet the difficult situation and find the strength inside. So I use this idea of the walkthrough and the Holy Grail. And I've gone to the Holy Grail in the St. Lorenzo Cathedral in Geneva. And it's a symbol and a metaphor for me because it's the vase and the verb. And this is something that I also found in St. Hildegard von Bingen's writings. So we are a sacred chalice, and we are also speaking and sharing our verses, our narratives. And so it's the sacredness of our stories also, and how they are contained in us, and how then we have to walk through them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm wondering, you've talked about, all the aspects of this dealing with conflict, the transformation of conflict and illness narratives. I'm wondering if you could share with us one example of a student. Like, when my first question is, okay, you begin with a video, they make a video. Well, what kind of video are they making? What does it look like? Can you give us a visceral sense of maybe one student, or maybe draw on your own process in terms of finding your birth family?
Well, I can talk about a student, for instance, that comes to mind right away. So I just was at Creighton last week, and I presented my book, and one of my students showed up. And it was really wonderful because then he was able to bear witness to his own experience with his own words. Mm. And he wrote about grief and how his grandfather had died and how difficult it was and how it was affecting his mental health. So he's actually not in the book, but it was a very deep conflict narrative because it involved his relationship with his grandfather, death, how he was looking at his own life as he was seeing his grandfather's illness and his decline, and then the resources that he sought out were different than if you were going through an accident and recovery from an accident or other situations. Eczema, for instance, it was on a different level. And so that student was able to find different resources and made some beautiful jewelry of crosses and put that together. He makes jewelry, so he makes things, and then he put that together with images for his transcendent representation. And when he came to the presentation, so it was my course on complementary and alternative medicine. He brought me lavender oil as a gift. And so there were all of these different levels in the process that I had gone through this summer with this student, because he embraced the pedagogy. He engaged with his partner and in a very responsible and engaged way. And he also then showed up at the presentation with a gift. And so it's amazing what comes from this, what emerges relationally, but also in the transformation of the situations that the students present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I'm still curious about, like, what was his video?
So he starts about telling the story about my grandfather died, because there are 8 questions. So he has the 8 questions of Kleinman. So
And
Kleinman,
that's the video, is them going through those questions. So it's just
exactly.
a video narrative then.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But what maybe it's important to underscore how I have them do that so that they become aware of the difference between when we speak, our oral expressions, as opposed to our written
Mm-hmm.
communications. So when they speak of their conflict or their illness, something different comes out, and then they become aware of that because they hear themselves. When they write, there are other dimensions that are written on the paper that can be worked with. And the written part can then be developed because as they go through the stepwise process, they're adding material. So they're adding depth to their story mandala and their transformagram. And they're adding in important references that they have chosen. So I have different chapters. I have Sheila's chapter. I have Sarah's chapter. I have Kenneth's chapter. So we have different chapters that they can choose that relate to their conflict or their illness, and they bring them in as references. So they deepen the process, moving from the oral to the written to the academic representation that looks at conflict or illness, but with the lens of the authors and the dialogue that they have created with important thinkers and academic scholars.
Okay, that's nice. What would you do with us if we were your brand new group of students? How would you begin?
How would I begin? Well, I think that the first slide for me was important because I begin with a metaphor, but it's a metaphor that is rooted in history, and it's rooted in this beautiful Bible verse of transforming, beating swords into plowshares. So it gives us already this ability to imagine. Letter Arc speaks of moral imagination, to imagine that we can take a sword and to make it into something useful to cultivate relationships, to grow food, to make life better, to engage in the good life. And so that brings us together and it unites us in a vision that's future forming, because we can see how we can craft peace. So we take the sword and we craft it into something that is generative for humanity. And so if we can all come together in that metaphor, then we can start relating and imagining together. And I think that gives us strength. So it's first to coming together and witnessing each other and being aware of the importance of the relational responsibility we have to each other in this space.
Okay. Sally, do you want to go ahead and voice your question?
Dan, go ahead.
Oh,
He typed.
I wrote it, but
Oh, sorry, Dan.
this process that you're describing in terms of your students and the class, I just wondered if it's applicable to your mediation work or therapeutic work, or is this just something that works best in an education frame?
Thank you. I really believe it could be used in a therapeutic setting. And so I've written a book that I'm editing right now, where I'm trying to expand autoethnography for integral human development and wayfinding. I wrote that at the end of the presentation because I believe that it is a tool that allows us to engage with our stories, our narratives, and transform them, and to see how connected the interconnectedness of our conflicts and illnesses, and to behold this. So yes, I hope that will be taken into therapeutic settings by offering different examples, but also applied to ecology. And so the importance of providing methods for relating to the more than human world. And to bring that in, I'm often in conferences where they say, you know, anthropology, we're dealing with these other dimensions, but how do we do it? Where are the methods? And so in that book, in this new book, I try to create exercises so that people connect with the seasons and with their natural environment. And I believe that that's a part of the therapeutic process today because of the Anthropocene.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Susie, one of the conversations that you and I have had, and I know it's difficult, you know, this is just speculation, but on the heels of what Dan just asked, how might you envision taking this work out of a pedagogical context, out of a mediation context, a therapeutic context, and into an organizational context, or a community context, or a governing context?
I think you have to be in an organization where the governance allows you to come in and do this kind of work. I've been a mediator and a researcher in the social action department with the police force, doing hostage negotiation, and in mental hospitals, working on psychiatric research and needs assessment. And one of the most fundamental aspects is to be legitimate within that space. I don't think we can do this work unless we have a legitimate role, and that the governing decision makers have agreed to allow us to do this work. So I think that's a really important part of it. Because that's often very difficult as a mediator, what I found is as I've introduced mediation or the different, you know, approaches that I learned through the Taos Institute, like appreciative inquiry, it actually challenges or threatens the power relationships in institutions and organizations. And so at the same time that we can transform organizations, I think it's important that people have tools to work on themselves so that they can develop this adaptability. We're facing very difficult situations in our world today. So how do we develop our own flexibility and adaptability so that we can shapeshift on the individual level that allows us then to interact on these other levels? So I talk a lot about the intra level. So I'm adding to conflict resolution the intra level with autoethnography and duoethnography, and it then corresponds to the interrelationships, interacting within our organizations and institutions. But then, you know, opening up to this global level, the global and the local. And we can't always go forward with our vision. So we're always, sometimes having to come back to our own selves and work on ourselves so we can adapt to the structural violence that we're facing. That's been my experience.
Yeah, okay. Joost.
Yeah, thank you. You triggered me, Sheila, earlier with your question about what would a video look like. So I'm interested, could you maybe say something about what students say when they look back on the whole process, about how it all started, what they went through, and what they gained in diving in?
Thank you. So one of the important aspects is a final synthesis of the process. So they have to write a process paper, and that process paper integrates these different phases and how they moved through the Transformagram experience. And so that is kind of the final work, the final step is the process paper. And that is when you really see how they've integrated the concepts, but also the individual process, because obviously they're in the course for conflict resolution. They want to learn about conflict resolution. But just teaching these theories, for instance, to the Afghan students that were in the middle of war, how effective is that to only stay on a theoretical level? So I feel like the course actually integrates their own lived experience and the complexity of where people find themselves, and that is shown then in the final work that is, that brings the story arc together.
Yeah, thank you. So, and how then would they voice that gain, what they got out from the, I mean, of course they have to write this letter that you're this I forgot the term you used, but
Transformagram Portfolio.
yeah. But so then would they say, well, I'm more happy now, or I can leave something, or in terms of their own lived experience, I mean.
So I wouldn't qualify that as being happier, but I would say that they have a more integral vision of their circumstances. They have a more holistic vision of the complex conflict that they've written about. So, for instance, I had one African woman in Malawi, and they're in a refugee camp. So, if you can imagine, these women are stuck in refugee camps. They can't leave, they can't work, and there's this opportunity to learn through the Jesuit Worldwide Learning Program. And so this one woman was having problems in her couple, but the whole process allowed her to write about it and to become more consciously aware of the different dimensions and to learn. So this pedagogical approach is important because it's learning, transforming through learning. So, and I think therapy also integrates that. We learn about ourselves. We learn about the different resources. That's why the cartography is so important. The mapping of the resources, or the care basket. We learn about different ways of moving through, walking through our conflict. And so hers was very personal. And she expressed her depression and the difficulty she was having, but being a part of the group and then talking with the other students, that because the African women got together and they helped each other out. So this whole duo ethnographic dimension was reinforced. And it was during a period when they were in COVID. So that was really interesting to see. Happier, I can't say that, but they felt accompanied during difficult times. The first time I gave the course, it was in the middle of COVID. And so students were online, and I had a large number of students. I had 19 students. And at the end of the course, a lot of them were pre-med. So who chooses my courses? Pre-med, nursing, people in lifestyle and healthy living, healthy ways of living, etc. There have been these different courses, or master's degree, not as much a master's degree, more a bachelor's degree level, but with adult learning also. So these people were coming in, and one of the pre-med students said, well, I've learned that this is not just a course, a learning experience, but it's also therapeutic, because it sustained the students during a very difficult period when they were online, when they were, facing all of these different illnesses within their family and their community. And so I think that way of accompanying through a pedagogy that integrates those different dimensions, the relational dimensions, is appreciated.
Susie, I want to share, back in the 80s, I used to teach a course called Family Communication. And in that course, I would introduce the students to 3 to 5 different theories about, basically therapeutic theories, like from family therapy, about transformation. What I would have them do is, the first thing is write a script of an unwanted but repetitive interaction in their own family. And then they would be anonymous. And every time we would finish discussing one particular theory, I would kind of switch these things up and pass them out. So a student would get somebody else's anonymous family pattern, and they would analyze it from the theoretical perspective we had just finished covering. And then the students I would get a copy to read and, evaluate, and there would be a copy given to the student, whether it was good or not good, it didn't matter, they get it. And so by the end of the course, they had about 5 different analyses from 5 different students of their own family pattern. And then it was their turn to write an analysis of their family pattern. So it was really an interesting process. But the most fascinating thing for me was about 15 years after one particular group of students had been through that course, I received a letter from, this was, email wasn't so big in those days, but a letter from a former student saying that she was really grateful for the course because the pattern she had written about was about her estrangement from her brother. And because of the analyses of her peers of her pattern, she reconnected with him. And he had just passed away, he had just died. And she was so deeply grateful that she had reconnected with him. Now, who knows, she may have reconnected with him for, anyway, without the course. But that kind of, the reason I share that story is because I feel in many ways, this is what you're doing, that learning isn't just an academic, intellectual activity. It's basically useless if it doesn't have an effect on your life. If you don't know how to take what you're learning and make the world a better place, not to sound too idealistic, but that's what education is supposed to be about. And we have come so far afield from that, where, it's memorizing facts and dates and names, being able to spit out a theory, but do you know how to apply it? Probably not. So anyway, I just appreciate very much what you've done in this multi-layered, drawing in so many different resources. It's, to just hear a brief overview, it sounds like a very complicated process, and yet I know it's it's laid out very clearly in the portfolio that the students create, and it does have lifelong effects for the students themselves. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. So I might connect to that story and say I started writing because I wanted to transform my own family patterns. When I met my birth family, I saw the family that I had been adopted into, and my 2 sisters were natural children in my family. So I could see the family patterns in that family. Then I could see the family patterns in my biological family that I was discovering. And then my sister, who was adopted, who found us, I could see the patterns in her family. And I, as a social scientist, was looking at all these family patterns and epigenetics and thinking, well, I don't want to repeat this. I want to bring it into consciousness, like Jung says, so it will not be fate, that my children won't have to carry this forward. Because there was a lot of trauma in giving me up. I call myself the giveaway girl, and I use the Native American ceremony as this transcendent way of looking at giving away an adoption with no strings attached. But it was very traumatic for my young mother, who was 17. So the family patterns are a core motivation for me. And the complexity of that, because you can learn theories, but how do you actually then embody the change? And one of the words I love from Saint Hildegard von Bingen is viriditas, the greening power of God. So when she would look outside, she would see the greenness. She would see how pastures and meadows would flourish with medicinal flowers and how they had healing virtues. And so this word viriditas seems to be this generative potential, this generative energy. And I think appreciative inquiry or the different Taos approaches in therapy and social change processes are linked to this traditional European medicine and this way of looking at the greening power that we're trying to elicit in our relational approaches for healing and becoming whole.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Yeah, Deborah.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. My question is if you could speak to the nonverbal healing activities that you've incorporated, the art, the mandala work, and the effect of the doing of that, and also like how is some, which I very much agree with, is that art or representation in nonverbal ways is often sometimes more powerful. And I'm wondering how you've incorporated that work.
Thank you. That is shown a lot in the course on integrative medicine. So they have a 700-page book about complementary and alternative medicine written by Mark Makosi, and it covers all the different traditional medicines. So it is a really interesting approach. He's also an anthropologist, who is a medical doctor and medical anthropologist. And so it's a comparative approach with all of the traditional medicines presented in depth so that you see that the medicines arise from cultural roots and practices and religions, and then they become practices, and that at certain times in history they've come together, and you can see at different phases how they are similarities. So it really allows for this comparative and holistic approach that is used in anthropology. And so they read all these chapters on these different forms of medicine. So Chinese, Tibetan, American, indigenous medicine, Sufi medicine, naturopathy, but which is based on traditional European medicine, and then the exchanges with the Native American, and how that generated a whole new approach. So all of these medicines are presented to them. They have to read the whole book, and they have articles and films that they have to watch to allow them to look at these different forms of healing, and not to become practitioners, but to understand the richness of each cultural practice. And then they have to choose in this mapping, this cartography, they have to choose the resources that they find that correspond to their illness. And so that's when they start integrating, well, I want to go walking in nature because of the forest bathing, the effect of forest bathing. Or I'm going to use reflexology with lavender oil. That's, I had shared that with my student, and they see that in the book. So then that becomes something that you integrate into your self-care practices. It's interesting how they are able then to be inspired by the traditional medicines and find what fits their personal needs and the possibilities they have in their daily routines. Because when they do a cartography, they have to mind map the resources and put them in a care basket. So it brings them close. They can't just theoretically think, oh, I could do this and that. They have to think, well, what could I actually really do? And then they get the feedback from their duo ethnographic partner, who says, well, did you think about doing this? Because that might be helpful. And it might involve some of them, use aromatherapy to before going to bed, to have different scents to stimulate relaxation. Some of them decide to add teas. It can be physical therapy and massage. So there are all of these different therapeutic approaches that really touch the body that then they experiment with. It becomes experiential. And that's the experiential learning dimension to the course, which I think is so important. Excuse me, and they also realize when you have something that happens to you, it's not just a biomedical response to the disease or the illness, because they realize that when something happened to them, they went to many different practitioners or sought out many different resources, but it's becoming consciously aware of that. And that allows them to see this interrelated approach, and also the conflicts that are even in the illnesses. What happened in these, one student said, my parents don't have insurance. When I got sick, I couldn't even go to the doctor. It's a financial burden. So they are putting together the structural violence in the healthcare system, it's through their own lived story and their own experience with resources that they can actually use to get better.
On a lighter note, it actually, as you describe that, it makes me think that taking your course is license for doing these wonderful things like massage or relaxation therapy or, sitting with a cup of tea to relax, that your course gives permission. In fact, it's a requirement to engage in self-care, which really is completely antithetical to most academic settings where you're stressed and overburdened and so forth. So it's a very humanizing process.
We listen to deans of medical school come to Switzerland and talk about their approaches. And this was in our, I think it was the Cincinnati work conference that you organized with the Taos Institute.
Mm-hmm.
They were nurses that were bringing in these self-care approaches, but there are also deans who have realized that the high levels of burnout for healthcare professionals are really making them consider how can they give support to students and accompany them so that they don't burn out, and then that they can learn about these practices in mentored groups. And so I've heard these deans speak about that, and I listened to the women that you had invited to the conference from the East Coast that were incorporating that into their nursing trainings. And so that was a great inspiration for me. And so maybe I felt then that I too could allow that to be our culture in this course.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. Dan.
In my professional life, before I became retired, I was a family therapist, and one of my mentors was a fellow named Carl Whitaker. And he once said to me that in order to kind of keep up with these innovative ideas that we were working on in family therapy, you needed to have what he called a professional cuddle group. And so I was thinking that with this innovative work you're doing, I would think that you would have a relational group that would be around you, that would be supportive and kind of hold you up. Could you speak about, who's in your professional cuddle group and what impact that has?
Well, thank you. The Taos Institute has been my cuddle group, especially Sheila, who's given me great support all through my process, because I think we met around 2005, so it's been a long time. And I think it is very difficult because of the academic culture. For instance, I got feedback this week from this book that I'm editing, and the peer review was, even though I have 4 pages of references, that there weren't enough references that person was interested in. And so you've spent so much time and effort, you've given your whole soul to your work, and then this academic peer review process sets in. So I do believe we need cuddle groups. And so that we can keep our faith in ourselves and connect to the resources inside and feel that we can work towards bringing them into the world. But what I do is I meditate, because I'm alone on top of a mountain and I don't have a cuddle group really. And so I meditate and I pray for about an hour every day outside, and my cat comes on my knees and gives me this kind of cuddle that maybe I don't get up here on top of the mountain. But also the forest bathing. I walk a lot and I hike and I run in the mountains. And so I get a lot of energy from nature.
It's so contrary to academic life, which is, as you talk about the review process, you're not a good reviewer, you're not a good academic if you don't tear apart what you're reviewing. And it's just that again, that tension between collaboration and competition. And competition is a dominant theme in our world, in academia, everywhere. It's about competition, and it's very hard for people to step out of that and into what kind of review commentary could have taken place for you, like, oh, this is great work, I love it, and I'm wondering about these references, would you consider including them, or something that's more generous and collaborative in nature. But that's unfortunately not what the beast is.
Well, I would say that the really nice cuddle was to have Sheila write the foreword and Robin write the afterword. And I mean, I'm in between. I'm held in between. And in my my homing in presentations, I say how, that when we behold our green emerald planet, it's holding us together. And it's in the I Ching also, this idea of holding together. And so I think it's really important that when we see it in our planet, when, the astronauts were able to put Rusty Schweikert, his finger on our planet, when he was in space, he had this moment, a spiritual moment, and then holding us together, we're all held together in the earth. And so it's this embrace that we must hold for all of us if we're going to stay strong in the values that we have cultivated in the Taos Institute, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anyone else, any final questions or comments or anything before we close? Well, Susie, I want to thank you for this. I know many people, which is often the case, have to leave on the hour and have left some really grateful commentary to you. And maybe Alex, if you could save the chat so that Susie could have that would be great. So I want to thank you for sharing your work with us. I want to thank all of you who have been here for your presence and your engagement with this topic. And I hope the conversation certainly can continue on the Commons. Feel free to reach out directly to Susie if you want to have more interaction around this. Alex, is there anything you want to add?
Yes, I just want to say that thank you, Susie. First of all, what a wonderful presentation, and we really appreciate your time and your contribution. And the event was recorded, so the recording will be available on YouTube. It will be in the Taos Institute Commons, so feel free to share it and continue to engage around this topic. And you can leave your comments in the Commons. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event. If you have any questions, always feel free to contact us. And our next webinar will be on November 5th. So we hope to see you there.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well. Take care. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.